Hi and welcome to Thete Gaming. All getting very exciting around here. Will be a few videos over the next week, but the first couple are going to be looking at some new War Scroll cards for Age of Sigmar. Lord Croak is getting an update, but first there's a new Destruction God about, and we got to see the War Scroll card for the Kragnos earlier this week. Basically, the fourth in the Broken Realms series will be centered on this new personality. Each book is named after the character who essentially wins at the end of it. So we've had Morathi and Teclis for Order, Be'lakor for Chaos, and it will soon be Kragnos for Destruction. No book named after Nagash or any other Agent of Death, because the ending of the Soul Wars was not a win for that particular Grand Alliance. So yes, we have a new God type model coming. It's pretty frightening. It's quite scary. On the same level as like Nagash, Archaos or Teclis, certainly. You will not want this thing getting in your face, because it will knock that face into the next century. It has a quite stupendous number of very high damage attacks. This thing is capable of wiping out an entire unit in one turn without even needing to be that lucky. So few things. I mean, I would want to shoot this thing from afar very quickly. Problem is that it is not a glass cannon either. 18 wounds, 2 up save, charging damage, and a very good chance to be immune to the effects of spells. So plinking it off with magic missiles is not going to be a reliable strategy. Essentially, if you do this thing, Kragnos gets to roll 3d6, and if the value is greater than the casting value, and that's not the casting value you got it on, that's just the casting value on the spell scroll, then he ignores it. And then when you do hurt him, because you'll need to hurt him, the more you hurt him, the more he hurts you with a thing called the bellow. Now, his one of his attacks does degrade with it. It's not, I was thinking like a bit like Scarbrand. It's not quite like that, because he just straight up gets better. At the end of any phase, basically, where he took damage, he has a bit of a shout. If he rolls above his Bellow of Rage, which gets easier the more wounds he's taken, it does D3 mortal wounds to a unit near him. Now, you roll separately for each unit, so it's not a case of all or no units take damage. Also, doesn't exclude your own units either, it's just anyone. They all don't like the shouting. But on the subject of that mechanic, I have to say there's one aspect of it I'm not a fan of, and that is demolishing defensible terrain. I'll tell you why. So garrisoning buildings is sometimes done. You know, I don't think it's that common. In fact, quite a lot of battlefields aren't necessarily even set up with terrain that can be garrisoned. But even when it is, having it in a suitable location and one of the players having a suitable unit that can benefit from it, it's not a given. It won't always be the case. So it's niche. But with Seraphon, it is way more common, because their faction terrain is defensible terrain. So against Seraphon, you always have that terrain, and you are encouraged to garrison it as well with the Seraphon rules for it. So here comes this chump. If he makes his bellow roll and is within 6 inches of it, he'll just destroy the terrain. And what's more, and this is where I have a major problem with it, you then have to roll for each model inside. On a 1, they are killed. You know, like being inside a 40k vehicle that's destroyed. Now, you could argue that's no worse than taking D3 mortal wounds in some cases. It's slightly worse if you've really crammed it out. But my issue with it is a rule that singles out Seraphon a little unfairly, because it doesn't automatically affect anyone else, really. There's the odd other terrain where technically you can have a model on it, but in terms of garrisoning, not really. But still, you know, it's a god, and you'd expect to have a hard time dealing with it. You know, it's the same way if you're facing off against Nagash or Archaos or Teclis. Of course your heart sinks. This is going to be the same. Now, I don't know what its points value is going to be right now, but I'm sure it will be suitably pricey. As such, you will be able to afford to dedicate a lot of your army into dealing with it, just as you would for Archaos or Nagash, for example. So what we're going to do about it? Well, there's going to need to be 3 types of counter to it, I suppose. The first is just to contain it. Corral the beast with small, inexpensive and highly mobile units. Kragnos himself is not super speedy. On his top profile, it's 10-inch movement. What you want is some cheap, highly mobile units. Don't engage it, of course. Stand them a few inches in front of it, just force it to have to charge one of them during its turn. They'll easily wipe it out. Of course they will, but then can't do much else. Rinse and repeat while you whittle it down with whatever else, or just leave it. Keep him doing his thing. Take it out of the game while it destroys 100 points worth of stuff each battle round, ideally less, and allow you to focus elsewhere. So, you know, fell bats, flesh hounds, pistoliers, whatever you've got that's cheap and can block off any avenues of movement for it. What you don't want to do, of course, is to have two of these things charged by it. You need to have a sort of series of speed bumps rather than a line where he can charge two of those, because he'll just take two of those units out. He'll wipe them out in one go. Your second option is, of course, the shooting phase. This is the obvious one. That's no magic bullet, of course. The mortal wounds from the likes of Lumineth, Realm Lords and Daughters of Cain shooting will help, but I mean, that'll bypass his save, but that's not going to do the job on its own. If your missile attacks have no rend, you will basically need an average of 108 wounds scored. Not 108 attacks or even 108 hits, 108 wounds, given his 2-up save. That's not feasible for any army. It goes down dramatically with rend, of course. So if you have a lot of shooting with rend 1, that means you need an average of 54 wounds. And rend 2, 36 wounds. So Kharadron Overlord stand a chance of just blowing it away, I suppose. Not straightforward for anyone, not straightforward for them. You wouldn't expect to do it in one turn, but then it shouldn't be straightforward. You know, beasts like this should not be wiped out in one go. That would be ridiculous. Your final option is just sheer weight of dice in close combat. Now, obviously, you'd rather not go anywhere near it in close combat, but realistically, you're not going to have that same weight of dice in the shooting phase. But unless you can contain it, you are going to have to get into combat. You've got no choice. And if you must do it, better to charge it than have it charge you. Unless, as I say, it's a unit you're using specifically as a speed bump. Because if Kragnos charges, I mean, he will choose to go first. So let's say you put up against it something like a unit of Witch Elves or Plague Monks. They could do a decent amount of damage to it. But they have to be able to go first. Otherwise, Kragnos could leave them with relatively few attacks left. Could even wipe the unit out if you got lucky. Because if we assume, let's say you've got a high damage infantry unit with, say, a 5-up save, Kragnos would be expected to deal about 22 unsaved wounds on his top profile. That doesn't include any charging damage or bellow damage if you hurt him. A bit of an ouchie there. Oh, and don't let him charge a monster. Seriously. He will very likely obliterate them on the charge without needing to even get to the combat phase. It's an absolutely outrageous rule he's got if he charges a monster. This is not something to take on with your big hitter. It probably needs taking out with lots of expendable attacks. I think more like a pack of wolves than a bear against this guy. I mean, I am very much looking at this and thinking, right, a combination of containment and whittle him down is what I'm thinking. Containment, I think, would be the first port of call if you've got the capability in your army. At the same time, that's all he has. You know, he will deliver a massive punch in combat. If he charges, he'll deliver a bit of a punch on the charge. But he doesn't have a missile attack. He adds +1 bravery to friendly destruction units, but that's it. He's got no other buffs. There's no command ability. Still, he is scary. And he will be scary. He will have that fear factor that often inflates the power of such units beyond their own capabilities. So, you know, part of its power will be that many players will fixate on the threat it poses. They'll imagine this thing sweeping through their entire army and destroying it in 2 battle rounds, which of course it won't. It can only, unless you allow it, as I said, to charge multiple units at once, it can only destroy 1 unit a battle round. Unless you feed it. Don't feed it. You know, and so, but people will have that image in their head and they will sometimes commit more attention to it than it deserves. And then, of course, the Kragnos player can just go, right, I'll just go and run off onto these objectives then. And you focus on him. But there we go. Those are my thoughts anyway. Lord Croak hopefully coming up in a day or 2. Until then, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And until next time, I'll see you later.